Dr. Trevor McCrisken is an Associate Professor of US Politics and International Studies here at the University of Warwick and has kindly agreed to come on today to talk about the US election. How are you, firstly?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm good. It's very cold,
It is very cold, yes.
Generally now, this is such a broad question. What are your thoughts on the race so far? Because it's been unlike anything we've seen before.
It has been a particularly contentious race. I mean, the candidates do often get quite feisty with each other. But I do think the level that this has descended to has, as you say, perhaps been without compare in the past. There have been moments where previous election campaigns have got quite nasty, but we really do seem to be sort of digging out the bottom of the barrel as much as we can with this particular one. And never a 24 hours goes by without there's some other new revelation or new shocking thing been said by one or other candidate. So it has been quite an exceptional campaign.
And the two main candidates have been blamed for that. But why has a third party not emerged from this election? Because you'd expect a sort of Ross Perot type character to emerge, but Gary Johnson and Jill Stein haven't quite lived up to that, have they?
I think there's all sorts of reasons for that. It is interesting that there was a poll about a month ago that Gallup conducted where they discovered that something like 2/3 of the American public would like to see an effective third party. They don't believe that the Republicans or the Democrats offer them what they actually want from the ballot box. But when it comes to elections, it's those two parties that get the vast majority of the votes. It's partly because of the way the system works. I think there's a recognition that a third party really does struggle to have a major national impact. And as you say, Ross Perot back in the 90s had a very successful, or at least on the face of it, seemed to be a very successful campaign for the presidency, but didn't actually secure very many electoral college votes. And so his impact was probably on drawing votes away, in his case, from George H.W. Bush in the 92 election. When he ran again in 96, again, he was drawing votes away from the Republicans rather than kind of for bringing into politics new voters. It is just incredibly difficult for a third party to sustain itself in the American system. There might be the odd election where they have a bit of an impact, and then either the issue around which they've come together dissipates, or it becomes taken on by one of the other two major parties. Or there's such a focus on an individual as there was with Ross Perot, who then formed the Reform Party. But once he left that party, it just fell apart and didn't have that leadership. The organisation level just isn't there, which obviously the two longer established main parties have got those structures in place, and it's just self-replicates from one year to the next. I think unless there was a really big overhaul of the political system so that the way that presidential and congressional elections took place and how the votes were then distributed and counted, if that were to occur, then you might have more possibilities for a third party to emerge in future. I think another thing this year too is that because of the strength of personality from those two main candidates, probably anyone who was thinking about a third candidate challenge rather than the third party challenge would have probably been put off, because they figured that, how could they compete with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, who, although in a lot of ways very unpopular, have got the public eye. And I think it would be incredibly difficult for a third party or a third candidate running as an independent to draw support away from either of those two.
Nationally, then, how well do you think the likes of Dr. Jill Stein and Gary Johnson could do? Because there were rumours that Johnson could be at about 10%. Is that realistic on election day?
I suspect it'll be a lot less than that. There might be one or two states where that's the case, but I think across the whole nation, it's unlikely that you're going to get much beyond, I think at best 5%. It's probably going to be more like the 1 or 2% of the national vote. I don't think there's a state where either of those two third-party candidates are going to have significant enough impact to actually win in the electoral college votes.
Because New Mexico was rumoured for a while, wasn't it? Because I think he was the governor, but that never really materialised.
Yeah, I just don't think it. A lot of voters are very realistic about what's possible, and there have been candidates previously who have drawn a fair amount of support as third-party candidates who end up meaning that a candidate wins the overall election who you really wouldn't want to see as president. For example, Ralph Nader, who ran for the Green Party in 2000, was relatively successful as a third-party alternative, but he mostly took votes away from the Democratic candidate Al Gore. And of course, in 2000, taking away votes from Al Gore meant that it gave George W. Bush the opportunity to come forward in some states and win. And in Florida, of course, where all the controversy was that year, to be able to stake a claim for that state, which ended up being upheld by the Supreme Court. Had Ralph Nader not been running, or had he not run as successful a campaign as he did, it's incredibly likely that Gore would have acquired enough votes in enough states to get enough electoral college votes so that Florida wouldn't have mattered. And I think there is a lot of understanding of that, particularly among Democratic voters, that if they were to give a vote for Jill Stein, no matter what they might think of Hillary Clinton as someone that maybe they would rather not see as the Democratic candidate, they're still going to do that vote rather than have the opportunity of Donald Trump becoming president, because they dislike him even more than perhaps they have queries about their own candidate.
Just finally on third parties, there was one other name, Evan McMullin, who a lot of people heard about because he was allegedly leading in Utah. Is that going to happen, do we think, or again, is it going to be...
I really would be very surprised if any third-party candidate was to come through and have a major impact, other than potentially drawing sufficient votes away from one or other of the candidates in particular states to be able to enable someone to sneak through. And I think probably the Trump campaign is more keen on that sort of happening, with Jill Stein perhaps taking away some of the more liberal votes to the Green Party rather than it going to Hillary Clinton. But I suspect that, as I say, there's a strong enough understanding among most voters that if they don't want to see the candidate that they really dislike the most becoming president, then they better go out and vote for one of the two main party candidates.
A lot of the polls have had Hillary Clinton well in the lead. I know that's narrowed a lot recently with the whole email saga, but there is a big perception that she is going to be the next president. On the night, what states would give us a good indication if it's not going to go to plan?
Well, there are certainly some states around the Midwest, around the Great Lakes, like Michigan, for example. If that were to tip towards Trump, then Hillary's really in trouble. Indiana, Ohio, other states around that region. That's where there's a fairly high proportion of blue-collar voters, and Trump's worked very hard to try to draw those votes towards his candidacy. So those are ones to look out for. Florida is going to be incredibly important, as it has been in all the sort of last elections of the last 20, 30 years. If that tips one way or the other, then you can fairly be assured that that's the candidate that's going to win overall. If you start seeing victories for Clinton in some of the southern states, she's looking very safe in Virginia, for example, but there's strong indications that she might win one or other or both of the Carolinas, and even possibly Georgia. If those start flowing towards Clinton, then it's going to be a good night for her. So there are some, and they are all on the east, sort of, east to Midwest, those early states to declare that will give us some indication of where things are going. And then there are a couple of toss-up states sort of in towards the west as well, so Nevada, New Mexico, even Colorado, that maybe might go one way or the other. We might have to wait to hear about those states coming through, but I suspect we'll have a clear enough view from the east and from the Midwest to be able to go to bed at a fairly reasonable early hour of the morning, 5 or 6, something like that, to be able to say, yes, we're pretty confident now that one candidate's going to win through. But I would stay up, frankly, because it could go either way. Yes, Hillary's looking very good, as you say, was looking very, very good about 2 weeks ago. The FBI email revelations, which turned out to be nothing, of course.
And that was today, that's
been announced overnight, that there's nothing new in this latest batch of emails to come through. Certainly nothing illegal going on. So, this is now an opportunity for Trump to say, of course, this is an example of the whole system being rigged against me. 9 days ago, when the FBI suggested there might be more to those emails than we thought there was, then it was the Hillary Clinton camp that was saying, oh, this is terrible, it's a conspiracy to try to bring us down, etc. That all seems to have come to nothing. Even with those potential of new revelations, some of the polling before the FBI said no, it's all clear, still had Hillary Clinton up to 5 percentage points ahead. So the indications are still very strong for her, I think. And if you look from from state to state, the polling again suggests that it should go to Clinton, maybe in the sort of 320, 330 electoral college votes altogether. You need 270 in order to win. But it's not impossible for Trump to come through. And we know from elections in this country and the referendum earlier this year as well that polling is not always the clearest indication of how people are actually going to behave when they get into the ballot box. And so where we've had the so-called shy conservatives in this country, the shy Tories, we might have some shy Trump voters who have been unwilling to tell pollsters that's where they're going with their vote. But once they got in the ballot box, then that was what they did. So, who knows? Who knows? It is very open. My gut instinct is to say we'll have President Clinton come January, but it's certainly not impossible that it could be President Trump.
Going back to the emails that you just mentioned then, a lot of people have heard this who perhaps aren't that interested in US politics. What actually happened there for people who don't know in sort of layman's terms?
Okay, so Hillary Clinton's got lots of experience in American politics. And one of the things that she did was to be Secretary of State in the first term of Barack Obama's presidency. While she was Secretary of State, she had a private email server that she used for official business as well as for personal emails. That's not allowed. And she should have just been using her official Department of State email account in order to conduct business, partly because that's a very secure account, etc. And so there were concerns that by using this private email server, she either made certain messages that should have been kept secret more vulnerable to being hacked or being, falling somehow into the wrong hands, or perhaps that she was trying to hide some information. Or hide some of the things that she was doing as Secretary of State from the American public, from the future sort of scrutiny of scholars, etc. So it's not something that you're supposed to do. And she's come out and admitted as much, that it was a mistake. She shouldn't have done this. She's apologized for it. There was an FBI investigation that concluded back in July of this year that there was nothing illegal about what she did. It was inadvisable. She shouldn't have done it, but there was nothing strictly illegal about what she did, and she'd not caused any vulnerabilities so far as the FBI could tell. And so this whole issue should have been put to bed back in July, and it did come up in the debates, the presidential debates, and on the campaign trail. It's something that Trump has carried on trying to hit Hillary with and say that this represents a larger sort of lack of trust that we should have for this individual, that she would abuse her power should she become president. She would do things that were unacceptable, not allowed. And so this was one of the ways in which the Trump campaign was trying to demonstrate that she wasn't fit to be president. But it all pretty much had blown over. Most Clinton supporters didn't seem that bothered by it. And as I say, she'd apologized for it as well. So it looked like it was an issue that had gone away. And then 9 days ago, the FBI director sends a letter to Congress and says, actually, through another investigation of somebody related to the Hillary Clinton campaign, we've now revealed a whole load more emails, something like 650,000 emails, I think. And there might be amongst these something we don't already know. And so we've got to start investigating those now. They've done that very, very quickly. They've looked at all of it because they came under immense pressure after making that announcement just 9 days before the election that this was in some way trying to influence the election on the part of the FBI director, which is disallowed by federal law. And so he's obviously directed his agency to try to look at all of these emails, find out if there is actually anything new there. And just last night, it was announced with yet another letter to Congress to say, actually, no, nothing new here, nothing illegal. And so the Clinton campaign saying, that puts everything to bed. We knew this already. We're not surprised. Can we now please move on and just have an election? But of course, Trump has come out and said, this is just more evidence of how the whole system is against me and the whole thing's being rigged against me. And so whatever the outcome by Wednesday morning of this election, we may yet have a legal challenge from the Trump campaign to say, not accepting the result, not going to concede. And it just rumbles on for weeks or even months just like the 2000 election did.
In terms of the allegations from about the Trump campaign now, obviously the talk about sexism, what have you made about that? I mean, how is he still a presidential candidate and he's been caught doing this so-called locker room talk?
Yeah, and admitted to it and said it was only locker room talk. Why are you so worried about it? It's interesting. You look back at previous presidential candidates where there have been controversies around them, and people used to talk about Ronald Reagan when he was running for office, and then when he became president, he was referred to as the Teflon president. Teflon being this non-stick material that certain sort of cooking utensils are made out of. And I think this is what we're seeing with Trump somehow, is that things just don't seem to stick to him, or at least they don't stick for long enough. It's a sort of controversies that would have brought down so many candidates for elective office, not just in the US, but in other countries as well. Yet somehow he manages to bounce back from it. And I don't know, maybe it's because people are truly fascinated by this character, that the sort of, how could he possibly become president? How could he possibly be a candidate? It almost keeps the thing going. It's quite entertaining. It's appalling. Most of the things that he said are utterly appalling and to be condemned, and have been condemned. But I think the media quite likes it because, it's kind of looking for, well, what on earth could he say next? We've still got 24 hours to go now. Is he going to say something even more outrageous than he has done before? I don't know. It really is something really quite remarkable. As you say, the misogyny, the racial comments that he's made, comments about Muslims in America. I mean, as any number of subjects that you could come up with, where he said things that should be so completely out there that would be the end of the candidacy, and he's done. But he keeps on bouncing back. And it's almost as though I think the sort of political discourse in the US, I think, will be affected by this for months, if not years to come. I think it's opened up the possibility of talking about subjects that had almost become politically taboo in ways that, there are people in the United States, as there are people in other countries, who hold the views that Donald Trump holds. And so they're throwing their support behind him because so far as they're concerned, he's telling it like it is. He's being honest. He's not just pandering to political correctness or whatever. And so perhaps that's why, to some extent, he's getting away with it, I suppose would be the way you would consider it. There are enough people that either agree with him and agree with the things that he says and like the fact that he's saying them, so they're going to carry on supporting him, or they're fascinated enough to keep watching, that somehow he's carried on. And as I say, it is still possible that he could end up being president of the United States. That seems an extraordinary outcome, an almost impossible outcome if you think about the things he's said and done. But it's not outside the realms of possibility. And I suppose that's partly because Hillary Clinton also has a lot of unfavorability, shall we say. It's a very interesting word, unfavorability, rather than being, so that these polls that are taken of, do you approve or disapprove of the candidate? Both Trump and Clinton come out with higher unfavorability than they have favorability factors. And again, that plays into the ability of Trump to keep going, is that there are enough people that really dislike the other candidate and are therefore willing to keep supporting Trump because they don't want to see Hillary Clinton as president.
You talked about unfavorability then. If Hillary Clinton loses this election, she must go down as one of the worst presidential candidates ever, because, even harking back to sort of Walter Mondale time, because she is against Donald Trump. He is sexist. Yeah. He has no political experience. She's going to be very embarrassed if she loses this, isn't she?
Oh, I'm sure.
Is that unfair?
And I mean, the thing about Trump, of course, which explain to some extent why he's been so popular among a certain sector of Republican voters, and perhaps some voters that maybe wouldn't have gone out normally to vote in a presidential election, is that he is anti-establishment. He doesn't have the political experience. He's not tainted with the negative feelings that there are towards Washington, D.C., There are plenty of other reasons, perhaps, to dislike Donald Trump, but that's not one of them. And so there is a very strong anti-establishment feeling in the United States, an anti-political establishment feeling in particular. And so that goes some way to explain his candidacy, that he comes from a different background. It's certainly not an unproblematic background, his business connections and what have you. But he has been, for good or ill, he has been a popular television presenter. He's been the presenter for many years on The Apprentice in the United States, and so a lot of his popularity is rooted in that. And as I say, he's saying things that a lot of people do actually agree with. There are sexist individuals in America, there are racists, there are anti-Islamic people in the United States, and they do support what he is standing for and feel that the country needs to be stronger than it has been, needs to be more tough on immigrants, tough on people who are not behaving in the way that this particular sector of Americans believe all Americans should act. Clinton, on the other hand, as you say, incredibly experienced, was Secretary of State, has been a United States Senator. She obviously lived in the White House for 8 years when she was First Lady, when her husband Bill Clinton was president. She did a lot of things politically then as well. She's a long political career. But that very much makes her part of this establishment that a lot of Americans really don't like. And so, and she's very well known as well in that respect. That there's all sorts of skeletons that have fallen out of her cupboard across the years, or out of her husband's cupboard that she then gets tainted with as well. Some things where people went into, let's not go there. But there's a lot of things that the Clintons have done that mark them out as real hate figures for the right in the United States. And when Bill Clinton was president, and there were the attempts to get him out of office because of his approach to life, shall we say. She stood by him through all of that. But more than that, she came out very publicly and criticized the Republican right for conspiring against her husband. And they've not forgotten that. Her first foray into politics was as part of the prosecuting team in the Watergate investigations. And again, there's a lot of Republicans that have not forgiven her for that. So these are incredibly polarizing individuals. They're not especially well liked even within their own parties. There's a big chunk of the Democratic Party that would have much preferred a Bernie Sanders candidacy for presidency, someone who's more left-leaning, more traditionally Democrat, you might argue. She represents the so-called new Democrats. I mean, they're not new anymore. They've been around since the 90s at least. But, the Clintons were at the forefront of that movement to a more centrist party on the part of the Democrats. So she's not completely liked within her own party. Trump, because he is such a maverick, sits outside of politics. As we know, an awful lot of the Republican leadership, the Republican elite, don't really want him to be president. They would rather lose this election and then fight in 4 years' time with a candidate who's more in line with what the Republican Party's elite and the kind of more traditional elements of the party would like to see in a candidate for president. They'd almost rather lose this election and then fight in 4 years' time against Hillary Clinton, who is likely to be, perhaps very unpopular by then after 4 years in office if she ends up being president. So there's all sorts of factors here that go some way to explain how it is that we've ended up with these two and what the consequences might be moving forward. But I do think whoever wins, we're going to see a kind of politics that's changed a great deal as a result of this presidential campaign, particularly in the way that politics is talked about, the discourse within which politics takes place in the US has been stretched out to areas that we probably never expected it to go. And that won't just neatly come back to the old way of doing things.
And if Clinton does win, it will be a third-term Democrat, which we haven't had for quite a while. Is it as simple as saying if the Republicans had chosen someone like Mitt Romney or John McCain this time, or John Kasich, I know who's seen as moderate, would they have walked this election, do you think?
I think it was always going to be difficult against the Hillary Clinton campaign. Once she won the Democratic nomination, I think there was an assumption prior to the nomination campaign that she would be the candidate for the Democrats. I think Bernie Sanders was probably had a stronger showing than was expected. And so, although there were an awful lot of Republicans that put their names forward for this time around, I don't know how fully committed they were to wanting to run against Hillary, because I think they saw that she had an incredible amount of experience, but also a massive kind of political machine behind her that's very effective at winning elections. It was very effective for Bill, and then it became very effective for her. And so it was always going to be a hard ask. It's astounding, actually, that Trump has done as well as he has in fighting against her in this campaign. I think 4 years from now, it's going to be a very, very different thing. For quite some time, in many years now, I've been suggesting that I thought Hillary Clinton would be the next president of the United States, but that she'd only manage one term. It is, as you say, it's been a long time since there have been back-to-back presidencies from the Democratic Party. But even when the Republicans have done that, it's been difficult for them to retain beyond 3 terms. And so, well, in fact, they haven't managed to do it. So I think it would be very difficult in 4 years' time for a president of the same party as Barack Obama to continue beyond that one term unless they're incredibly successful. And they'd need to have a lot of big wins on the domestic and the foreign policy front, which, of course, is going to be very difficult for them because foreign policy is extremely difficult for the US at the moment, is unlikely to get much easier in the coming years. And on the domestic front, whoever the president is not going to have a particularly friendly Congress to deal with. So achieving very much domestically is, again, going to be very, very difficult. But Hillary Clinton is a consummate politician. She knows all about how to strike deals, how to move agendas forward, even when they're unpopular. And so she could prove a successful president and manage to go beyond the one term. And again, she's very good at running for president, and there will be the incumbency benefit in 4 years' time. But yeah, it's very, very difficult for a president who has followed a president of their own party who's had 2 terms to then win 2 terms themselves. But it's, again, not impossible.
Final couple of things. I want to get your thoughts on the primaries. We spoke about Bernie Sanders very briefly. Yeah. On the Republican side, there was a whole host of names, many of whom I haven't heard of, some people haven't heard of.
Yeah.
Who really stood out? Because Bernie Sanders has been in politics for such a long time, an independent senator, but he's never really had this name recognition before, has he? Is it a similar Jeremy Corbyn effect?
I guess it's somewhat similar to that. He was recognised as being a definitely leftward leaning, he's called himself a socialist for years. And that, of course, is what Obama was accused of being when he very much wasn't, by the right, at least. The level of his popularity, I think, really did surprise the Democratic Party. And I can't imagine it will be him in 8 years' time, because let's face it, if Hillary does end up being president, she's most likely to be the candidate in 4 years' time as well. I think Bernie Sanders would have reached retirement age by the time, very much where he's already in retirement age. But, he will have, I think, pulled back from national politics at that point. Who will rise through on the Democratic side is very hard to see at the moment. That, again, perhaps gives advantages to the Republicans, who will have had these wound-opening failures to become presidential candidates for some time now, and then failure to actually win presidential elections. They will be looking to put forward the strongest possible candidate in either 4 years or 8 years' time, whenever it is. It's surely got to be somebody who's younger than the current candidates, has perhaps different ideas about how to move forward American politics. It could be pretty interesting in 8 years' time that we have completely fresh people coming into to fight for the candidacy of both the main parties. It could even be by then that disillusion with those 2 main parties has become so great that a third party does come through. But again, whether that would end up representing a different kind of politics and different positions than is the case at the moment, again, is hard to see. Primaries, as this year demonstrated, do tend to bring through stronger success for more radical positions than a general election would. And so even if you get more leftward-leaning or more rightward-leaning candidates being successful for the two main parties in future, when it comes to the national election, whichever of them is more centrist is more likely to win, because you have that more moderating effect when it's a larger number of people going out to vote in the general election than it would be in the primary season. So I don't know, watch this space, I suppose. But, yes, a lot of it will pivot around what the outcome of this election is. If Hillary Clinton doesn't win this time, she won't be running again in 4 years' time. I'd put money on that. Donald Trump, who knows? Maybe he'll form a third party. Maybe he'll run as an independent next time. There's any number of possibilities there. So it's a fascinating subject. It's one that, hopefully students will keep on wanting to study. Certainly it will keep us entertained for a long time to come. But it does obviously have a lot of consequences for how politics operates within the US as to which party does own the White House and succeeds in Congress. Affects the rest of us as well, most likely. So it's very difficult to crystal ball gaze, but let's get this Tuesday out of the way first, and then we can start to think about what will happen 4 or 8 years from now.
Now, very finally, there's a day to go before the election. How many people do you think are still genuinely undecided? And if so, will that tip the balance, do you think? Or do you think it's pretty much made up?
I suspect the vast majority of people that definitely know they're voting have either done so already through early voting or know exactly which candidate they're going to vote for, and they've not changed their minds for months. And they will go out tomorrow and vote the way that they would have voted. There will be a good few million, which on the American scale is not insignificant, that maybe are still umming and ahhing. I think it's more likely that you've got people that would vote Republican but have got real problems with Donald Trump who are wondering whether they can bring themselves to do it. And I think you've got people that would vote Democrat but again have questions about Hillary Clinton and they're not sure whether they would vote. So for me, it's more a case of people that are maybe undecided about voting rather than undecided about who to vote for on the whole. And so voter turnout will be important on this Tuesday. If voters come out in large numbers in the way that they have done in the last couple of presidential elections, I think that probably tips things towards Hillary Clinton, because the more voters there are, you have a greater proportion of women voting in the United States who have, over the last several elections, been more likely to vote for Democratic candidates than they have for Republicans. Given there's a woman running for the Democrats, that maybe exaggerates that position even further. But also other groups that are more likely to vote for a Democrat. If there's a larger turnout, you're going to get more young people, more African Americans, more Hispanic voters. That again tips the bias towards the Democratic candidate. But I think voter turnout, rather than people changing their minds at the last minute, I think it's going to be, are those voters that would vote one way or the other, are they actually going to go to the polls? So all sorts of factors come into it. Is the weather good? Is there good reason to go? So I think voter turnout will be the thing that will potentially have an impact on the last 24 hours. I can't really see, well, who knows, because this has been such an incredible campaign. I was about to say I can't really see anything major happening that would change everybody's minds. But again, it's so unpredictable that there could be a massive revelation one way or the other that would kind of tip the balance before everyone goes out and votes tomorrow. But hopefully by Wednesday morning, we will know who the next president of the United States is going to be.
Final concrete prediction, Dr. Trevor McCrisken, what do you think?
My gut is telling me it's going to be Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
My brain sort of tells me it should be Hillary Clinton as well, because the way the numbers stack up. But if Trump wins, it will be because there have been a lot of people in polls who have not really said which way they were going to vote, and they were always going to vote for Trump, or for some reason they've tipped at the last minute towards him. So he could do it. But I will say that I'm more confident that it will be Hillary Clinton that will win the presidency. I think actually, if you want me really to predict, you're probably looking at something like 320, 330 electoral college votes for Hillary Clinton. But that could be massively wrong. That's my get out clause at the end.